Here's a harsh truth. Skipping just one key cleaning step every 10,000 miles can put your entire engine at risk of failure. We're not just talking about old cars. Modern vehicles with synthetic oil and monitoring systems can still suffer catastrophic damage if drivers ignore these checks. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you the overlooked reason people ruin perfectly good cars and explain the simple preventative routine that keeps engines alive far past 200,000 miles. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. What if your engine was quietly destroying itself every single time you turned the key, and you couldn't see the damage until it was already too late? That scenario isn't rare. It's the reality of oil sludge. Sludge is a thick, gummy residue that forms when engine oil breaks down and mixes with contaminants. Every trip you take adds heat, pressure, and microscopic debris. If the oil isn't refreshed in time, it changes from a protective fluid into a sticky black paste. That paste doesn't sit harmlessly at the bottom of the pan. It creeps into passages and clogs the routes where oil is supposed to flow freely. The scary part is how many drivers think this can't happen anymore. With synthetic oil marketed as nearly indestructible and cars equipped with oil life monitoring systems, people often assume sludge is a relic of the past. But that belief lulls drivers into risky habits. Synthetic oil does fight breakdown better than conventional oil, but it's not magic. Additives wear down, heat cycles accelerate oxidation, and moisture still contaminates the system. In other words, no oil is immune to turning into sludge if it's pushed beyond its limit. Picture opening an engine cover and seeing globs of goo coating the components. That sludge acts like tar, throttling oil supply and leaving rotating parts gasping for lubrication. Without that thin, liquid cushion of oil, metal grinds directly against metal. Pistons seize, bearings scar, and heat builds up faster than the cooling system can handle. Once the protective film vanishes, the engine doesn't just struggle. It begins tearing itself apart. What makes it worse is the chain reaction. Clogged galleries create hot spots. Hot spots warp parts, and warped parts misalign, forcing nearby components into stress they were never designed to withstand. And the consequences aren't limited to mechanical headaches. Automakers have strict maintenance requirements tied to warranties. If sludge shows up in an engine that was supposed to be under warranty, many companies point directly to missed oil changes or ignored service intervals as grounds for denial. That's why owners stuck with sludge-related failures often face repair bills alone. A simple example is a destroyed head gasket from overheating caused by sludge buildup, an issue that can easily spiral into a total engine replacement costing thousands. It's tempting to dismiss sludge as purely cosmetic, something that just looks ugly when mechanics pull off the cover. In reality, it's the beginning of catastrophic failure. What starts as a sticky film ends with warped heads, ruined seals, and even complete engine lockup. And here's the part most car owners overlook. This nightmare is entirely preventable. Regular checks of your oil's color, consistency, and smell provide clear warnings before sludge builds beyond control. By understanding that oil has a lifespan and respecting that limit, you can stop this hidden assassin before it ever attacks. So, the real question becomes this: what subtle warning signs appear before oil sabotage turns deadly for your engine? How can you tell if your car is already on the path to engine death? The truth is, your oil starts sending warning signals long before total failure. But most drivers overlook them. Oil isn't just a slick fluid to stop parts from rubbing together. It also absorbs heat, keeping temperatures stable where combustion is at its hottest. Once oil breaks down, it loses both jobs. It struggles to cool, and it no longer coats metal effectively. That's when the engine starts crying out for attention in ways many owners don't recognize. The most obvious sign shows up on the dipstick. Fresh oil has a clear amber look, but oil starved of life transforms into a thick, tar-like mess. This isn't just ugly. That consistency means the oil isn't flowing fast enough through the tiny passages it needs to reach. Pair that with a burnt smell coming from the oil itself, and you've got undeniable evidence that the additives inside it have already broken down. A burning odor tells you the oil is literally cooking under heat it can't control anymore. At this stage, the oil hasn't failed completely, but it's already harming efficiency. Here's where a lot of owners fall into a trap. If the car feels smooth, they assume there's nothing wrong. The gauge still looks fine, no engine rattle, and no smoke from the exhaust, so the thought is, why worry? But performance loss sneaks in gradually. A neglected engine often begins consuming more fuel for the same commute, or struggling to give you the same power. What you pay at the pump becomes the first invisible consequence of ignoring your oil. In fact, low-grade oil increases friction across the system, forcing the engine to work harder and devour more gas just to compensate. Other signs are built right into the dashboard. That low oil pressure light isn't a small annoyance. It can mean oil sludge or thinning fluid is no longer holding pressure between the crankshaft and bearings. You might also hear subtle knocking or ticking from under the hood. Those noises are moving parts tapping where oil should have formed a cushion. Even the need to keep topping off the oil between changes says something. Some drivers think pouring in a fresh quart fixes the problem, but adding clean oil on top of degraded oil only hides the damage happening inside. The underlying chemical breakdown doesn't reverse. It continues eating at the system. These warnings may sound intimidating, but they are actually good news. Why? Because they appear long before you're looking at a seized engine or a destroyed head gasket. Recognizing them early means you can still correct course and avoid paying thousands for repairs. But that leads to the bigger question. If the old 3,000-mile change rule is outdated, how often should you really replace your oil to keep that protection alive? Why are so many drivers still stuck on the old 3,000-mile oil change schedule, even when every dealership, manual, and website gives different advice today? It's confusing because newer oil blends and advanced filters have changed what's possible. Decades ago, oil broke down quickly, and filters captured only the biggest particles, so short intervals were safer. But modern synthetic oils resist heat far longer, and high-efficiency filters trap debris that would have circulated freely in older engines. These improvements stretched intervals far beyond what mechanics used to recommend. But they also introduced a dangerous gray area where drivers think they can stretch things endlessly. The biggest problem is how different the guidance looks depending on where you look. Some manufacturers even list change intervals as high as 16,000 miles if you're in light-duty conditions. That sounds great until you compare it with the same manual's severe use recommendations, which often cut those numbers in half. Severe conditions aren't just extreme racing or desert driving either. Everyday habits like constant stop-and-go traffic, short trips that never let the oil heat up completely, towing, and sweltering summer heat all count. In fact, the majority of city drivers spend their lives under what's technically considered severe driving. Industry ranges reflect this huge spread. Organizations like AAAA and publications such as Car and Driver point to oil intervals generally landing between 5,000 and 7,500 miles for many cars. Some cars can safely stretch to 7,500 or even 10,000 under normal conditions, and a select few managed systems claim over 12,000 with high-quality synthetics. That sounds like a wide safety margin, but those numbers only work if the car is driven gently in near-ideal conditions. The truth is that actual engine wear levels vary wildly depending on load, temperature swings, and trip length. What's important to remember is that modern vehicles don't simply count mileage anymore. Most cars use an oil life monitoring system that measures data inputs, things like average engine temperature, throttle usage, and idle time, to estimate real oil condition. That's why two identical cars parked side by side can notify their owners at completely different times. These systems are accurate, but they still assume owners follow other maintenance basics like checking oil levels regularly and replacing the filter before it clogs solid. Too many drivers treat the alert as the only signal, ignoring issues the computer can't see. And here's the real kicker. Pushing oil too far doesn't just risk a minor loss of performance. You might save $60 to $70 by skipping a change, but if the oil breaks down and causes bearing wear, the resulting repair job can top $4,000 or more. What makes it even more surprising is that synthetic oil, even the most advanced blends, still age with time. Oxidation and moisture in the crankcase slowly erode the oil over months, which means even if you drive very little, an annual oil change remains a non-negotiable baseline. Engines lasting 200,000 or even 300,000 miles aren't rare anymore, but they don't happen by accident. The cars that achieve that lifespan share one thing in common. The owners stay disciplined about oil care. Every skipped change, every ignored warning light, and every instance of sludge left unchecked quietly shaves years off an engine's life. That's why your manual isn't optional reading. It tells you exactly when to act. Checking the dipstick, paying attention to odd smells, or noticing noises can mean the difference between routine upkeep and catastrophic failure. One easy step every 10,000 miles protects the most valuable part of your car.